Welcome to Qualified Opinions, where we test the ideas and limits, the knowns and known unknowns around freedom and order in contemporary politics and society. We invite you to listen as we engage with leading and emerging thinkers across disciplines and issues who will sharpen our thinking on the topics shaping our discourse. So I'm really excited today because I have two of my colleagues to discuss, who knows what we're going to end up discussing really about. But Rebecca Lowe and Henry Oliver. Rebecca is a political philosopher and Henry a literary critic, whatever that means. They're both at the Mercatus Center, and they are the founders of a new Substack project called the Pursuit of Liberalism. So let me start by summarizing what I think they're up to. And they can tell me if I'm completely wrong. Right? So welcome, guys.
Thanks so much for having us.
It's great to be here.
I liked your bemused face when you described me as a philosopher, and then your even more bemused face when you described Henry as a literary critic.
No, I thought that was good. No one knows what a literary critic is. It's about time we admitted that.
Have we found the only thing that is harder to define than philosopher?
I actually will admit that you're the only one I know.
That's probably good for you.
And it's also I never realized I needed someone like you in my life.
Of course.
So here we are. So let's do this. So, okay, here is my attempt to define your project, and you tell me if I'm wrong, right? So the liberal order, free market, free speech, the rule of law, democratic self-governance, autonomy, I guess we can put that in there. Keeping government at bay, does that work in there in that project? At least it does for me. It's delivered more for human flourishing than any competing system in history, right? And yet it is losing the argument, or we are losing the argument, maybe I should say, right? Not because its principles are wrong, but because its advocates probably have narrowed the case for it down to economic and legal theory. And I will say that as an economist myself, I'll be the first to concede that we economists have probably done liberalism a disservice by dominating its defense. We're good at GDP, but we're not so good at meaning and dignity and the human soul. So what I see Rebecca and Henry doing is wanting to fix that by recovering the full breadth of the classical liberal tradition, the one that ran from Adam Smith through Mill, through a lot of authors, and one that understood from the start that this was a project about the whole human life, not just the efficiency of markets, right? Am I getting this right?
No, I think this is great.
So far, so good.
This is very good.
One thing I would say is you say that economists have done a disservice. I think there's an argument that you guys have been doing a great job. The rest of us have dropped the ball.
Exactly.
This is a division of labor.
Yeah. So we'll talk about this. I think.
That's right.
Well, I think you're right about this, even though I actually think that there's two sides to this coin. But I want to start with this question, which is this a recovery or a reconstruction, right? When Adam Smith started, he started with the theory of moral sentiment and then the wealth of nation, right? So kind of the philosophy work first. I mean, I'm laughing because Rebecca thinks he's a terrible philosopher. And
I think he's a much better economist than philosopher.
So it's all relative. Yes.
I actually do think he's a bad philosopher
I claim him, even though he starts with the philosophy, good or bad, I can't judge, but I want to claim him as an economist because we have so few really good of them left that actually I'm happy to claim
He's clearly
him.
one of the greatest economists of all time, whereas if you were saying how good of a philosopher he is, he's not in the top 50. I would be astonished if any philosopher said he was in the top 50 philospers.
Yeah.
I would actually say not top 100, although I love reading him.
Even the top 50 best philosopher, best, I mean, by your account?
Oh, he's not in the top 50 philosophers, but he's easily, I think he's the best economist of all time, but I think very few economists would deny he's in the top 5, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, he kind of created the field to some extent.
That's right.
And it's kind of astonishing how much of the stuff he talked about.
Yeah, I also
just things that economists over the years have not just kind of continued to basically find correct, but have kind of managed to kind of prove in many different ways. And how kind of 250 years later, they're just kind of a big project on the illiberal side, whatever, whether on the right or the left, to actually just still go after Adam Smith, which tells you a lot about his
I think that's right.
influence.
And I think you're also starting to make a good objective case for Adam Smith, qua best or one of the best economists, whereas I was just relying on this kind of consensus-driven notion. So yes, I think there's also a much thicker case.
But so he started, right? He was building something. And so I want to kind of ask you this. In your case, are you trying to just recover something that's still here, that we still have we actually kind of lost the plot so much that it requires rebuilding entirely?
I don't think it's that bad. So it was interesting when you said, are we losing the argument?
Mm-hmm.
We might be losing the argument in the sense that post-liberals and the new right, that whole crowd of people have more influence, right? And more media attention, and J.D. Vance can say all these things that have that kind of vibe to them. But in like real terms, when you get tariffs, the courts knock them back. And so the liberal order itself actually is still quite robust. Even among the quote-unquote post-liberals, they still all kind of want free speech, right? I don't think anyone's out there saying no First Amendment.
I don't.
It's not certain, but it's also not like, I don't know. I feel like we're losing the argument, but it's almost like we're not having an argument. We're having a kind of vibes contest. And our problem is we sound stuffy and old-fashioned, right?
I think kind of we are not. We haven't had to make the argument for a long time.
Exactly.
But here's the reason why I do worry that we are losing the arguments. And I think kind of people who are very optimistic about the state where we are, and who are actually saying, look, we're still, I mean, the Supreme Court is in a way is like the last branch standing, right? Mm-hmm. In the whole construction that the U.S. is in trying to actually do what it was meant to do, right? Because like kind of when you look at Congress doesn't want to do its job, the executive is actually want to do all of the jobs all of the time, right?
I would say that there are problems with the Supreme Court.
Sure.
Of course there are like problems like with the Supreme Court, but the like I think kind of pointing out the politics is downstream of culture.
Yes.
And what I worry about is like we haven't actually experienced full on what a potentially new generation, like the younger people who have not heard a defense of liberalism ever, like either because schools are biased against it, or because they're actually enthralled by the post-liberal project, and the guys who can't fight girlfriends are deciding that, it's time to change the rules or whatever. I mean, I'm sorry to be kind of diminishing their project, but so this is kind of in that I think I worry that there's just a lot of people say, hey, look, the polling shows, Americans are still with us. And I kind of worry that we haven't seen yet kind of the wave of younger people who actually could be not even know what we're talking about.
So one thing I find interesting about that is how individualistic those arguments are. Mm-hmm. So people will say the system isn't working for young people, right? And that's why they're turning to these other sorts of ideas. But they'll frame it often in terms of like, these individuals are not getting what they want. Mm-hmm. They're not doing as well as these people. Like, it's not like there's some kind of moral basis on which a more communitarian tradition or whatever. It's just saying we take the premise of liberal individualism. We don't think we're getting enough of it. So we'd like to try something. And I think, well, so you're pretty liberal, right? You want bad policies. But so I think in a way it looks bad right now, but it would be easy to overstate the case for how illiberal people actually are. And I hope, therefore, this is maybe just liberal optimism, but I hope they're more persuadable because of that.
I think I agree largely with that. I certainly agree that you sometimes get these headlines like young people hate democracy.
Yeah.
I tend to think this is probably quite bad polling. They probably haven't asked terribly good questions. I also think if it actually came down to it, people really hate being constrained and they just kind of assume it wouldn't apply to them. But a couple of things I'd say in response to your original question. One, you gave the example of Adam Smith. Adam Smith was very broad. He did philosophy, he did economics, he did astronomy and all kinds of things. Law. I think we've seen a real over-specialization of academic disciplines or many academic disciplines over the last 50 years or so. Certainly you see that within philosophy.
You see this with economics, which is now mostly, all the big department of economics is applied math.
Exactly.
It's not even
So this kind
economics.
of specialization, I think, means it's less likely you're going to get someone like Adam Smith. I think there is some value in being a specialist, though, and this is partly why I come back to this division of labor point. I think economists make good arguments for the way in which certain kinds of economic orders bring about better results. Those kinds of arguments, economists are good at making that. They can give empirical evidence about certain, to back up certain claims. It's a certain kind of skill, which is very important within this battle. Philosophers do different kinds of things. Literary critics do different kinds of things. So I think there's one just explanation partly, I think, for why we don't see the Adam Smith character, which is something like that. And then the second thing, you said something about people won't know what we're talking about. And again, I think over-specialization can lead to people making these quite complicated arguments. Or, hey, you should have the liberal order because, and then they show a, supply-demand graph. And there are some people who just don't get what that thing is, just on the basic level. Or people making even more complicated economic type arguments, whereby if someone like Henry comes along and says, look, read this novel, which is a product of a liberal society, and you can see that these people are having a happier life. Or someone like me comes along and says, but would you rather live in the situation in which you had X rather than Y? That just might be easier for the non-educated person or the person who hasn't had the economics training to understand. So I think these are some costs of over-specialization and some arguments in favor of a broad division of labor to make arguments for liberal ways of living.
It's also directly a consequence of leaving print culture. So one reason, like Adam Smith was a good literary critic. John Stuart Mill was a very, very important literary critic. And one reason why modern economists aren't like that is because we don't have print culture in the same way. And so you just can't expect people to be across things in the same breadth. And also your audience isn't going to be thinking like that either. So one reason for the fragmentation of the liberal tradition is just that we have television, right? Yeah,
but you could think that in a way television could be a medium to actually reach just kind of, and it was for, I guess, when we had fewer channels, more of the country was watching all the same shows, right? Everyone had watched this. I don't know what the American kind of I Love Jeannie maybe, or I in France, I don't know what it would be, but we were all actually watching Benny Hill on Sunday night. It's kind of random, and I don't know. Me. And I don't know if it does anything good for liberalism or not. But anyway, I remember actually at the beginning of Twitter, right? Someone saying Twitter is this way we all watch TV together, because when they were still like dropping episode of Downton Abbey, like everyone was on watching and reading what other people are saying. But there are these moments that still exist, but less so than it used to be.
But that's also a very good example. Everyone's watching Downton Abbey.
Yes.
Right? When John Stuart Mill was young and editing the Westminster Review and participating in an intellectual circle in London, everyone was reading Tennyson, because that's what they did. You're not going to get that now. That's not. Well, you can get more of it.
You may not get it through books, but I do think, kind of, for instance, I don't know what you think of like the Artemis mission. I have a feeling that. I mean, I have a feeling that this is kind of a moment that got the closest to actually getting the country together around kind of the idea of America somehow, of something. Like, so there's still these moments.
I agree on the national unity point, but on the idea of like an economist or a liberal having someone like Adam Smith's breadth, I think screens have largely done it. I mean, we have colleagues at Mercatus who have that breadth, right? But it's no longer normal. And when it's coupled with specialization, tenure track, whatever, I get that. Many factors count against it.
Tyler is kind of one of these guys who were like, he's not known just to the economist, but he's known to the philosopher.
So you made a very interesting point in a recent debate that I held here. It was on AI. You made this great point. You always say that you're not a philosopher. It was a great philosophical point about the distinction between a generalist and a specialist. I would say the three of us are generalists.
Yes.
You gave Tyler as an example too. This is just more unusual these days, partly because of the stuff we said about specialization, partly because maybe there are just these great opportunities to become a real expert in something quite narrow. There's also, I mean, certainly our education system in the UK is heavily geared in favor of specializing from a very early age. You have to pick like the 4 subjects you're going to do for A-level when you're 15 or something.
Yeah.
And then you're basically bought into that track. You go to university and you study one subject, not like the kind of more liberal arts type tradition in America. So you're kind of, now you can shift track, and some of us have, but it's much, much harder with, so you just have these cultural, again, these kind of, these cultural constraints which lead to a kind of, and I think specialization brings about amazing goods. I don't want to deny that,
course.
But it can have these cultural
Now, the internet makes it easier to be a generalist.
Yeah.
Right? And I think one reason why Tyler is a more generalist economist is that he has the internet, so he can do that. He can make that part of his output in a way that...
But there is cost on a professional level.
Of course.
I do actually think that the power of generalists is when they're embedded in a team of specialists.
Yes.
Yeah, nice.
And I think that's where you get more of the innovation. Like if you put all the specialists together, they just think along one pillar, right? But you bring in a generalist, even like an economist who's a generalist, but reads kind of really across.
So I would say, I think the best generalists also do have a specialism.
Yeah.
So this point around the generalist who's the economist, I struggle to think of any really good generalist, particularly a generalist who could have that value within the group, who doesn't also have some kind of specialism.
Keynes is a great example of that.
Exactly. Great example.
Yeah.
Smith himself also, we can debate all day about what his greatest specialism was.
Well, and
I'm saying we're generalists, but you're the economist, you're the literary critic, and I'm the philosopher. But then we also just happen to be examples of that, where we do have these broader interests.
Well, so let me ask you this. So let's be concrete. Like, so you have this new Substack, The Pursuit of Liberalism. You have the first season out of your podcast.
Yes, episodes dropping every other Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly, every other Tuesday.
Sam gave me that line.
Every other Tuesday. But I mean, you've taped a bunch of things.
Yeah, it's all in the can.
As I know from your introduction, you even interviewed a bureaucrat.
And hey, that was a great episode.
We've got a lot of hits on that. That was our first
that was very
episode.
good.
First episode. You're starting very, very strong. And it's fantastic. You each have your own Substacks, which are really worth reading, just
Thank you.
In and of themselves. Rebecca, you started at the Mercatus Center, a project called Emergent Scholars.
Yes.
So there's just kind of this project, the Pursuit of Liberalism, is one that you are also pursuing in many different forms. So 10 years down the road, what kind of success, what does success look like? Is it like a change culture in think tanks? Is this politician who quote, Jane Austen alongside Hayek? What is it?
I mean, that would just be good in itself. We have this little strap line. I even wrote it down so I don't forget it. It's refocusing classical liberalism on the arts and philosophy alongside economics.
Yes.
I think that final thing, alongside economics, speaks to something we said early on, which is the economists have been doing a great job. Most smart people do understand that this kind of set of institutional arrangements that you described so nicely at the beginning brings about the best results, at least on net. Our lives are improving. I mean, I keep saying this almost every day, every hour. You've heard me say this a million times. You did a tweet about this the other day. We just live in the most amazing time, just on these obvious levels in terms of healthcare outcomes.
Did you see this thing? It was amazing. Like, they gave a shot to a guy who'd been deaf.
Yeah, incredible.
And he could hear.
And there's this new stuff every day.
I mean,
the space stuff that I'm obsessed by. Every day. We're about to find out about the aliens. We're literally living in the most, and we might get to live forever.
I was reading yesterday in the New York Times that GLP-1 drugs, actually, they shrink concussions.
I saw that.
They're like all these kind of benefits. I mean, I'm telling you, in 10 years, we're all on it.
So economists have been doing a great job of explaining.
Yeah, we love the economists.
Yeah, we do. Yeah. But the hope would be for something like our project that those of us who really care about arguing for this kind of set of institutional arrangements, however you want to describe them, however you want to discuss their value in the broad sense, will be appealing to these other ideas, these other notions beyond just, hey, empirical facts tell us X outcome, right? So we'll have the Henrys of the world, and it won't just be Henry, this will be the point, he'll have his Henry clones who will be saying things like, if you read Dostoevsky, sorry, I'm using that example because Henry
let's hate on Dostoevsky, that's good.
We can hate together.
We can do that,
Then you can see these things. There's an interesting question about the causal arrow in terms of liberal cultures producing certain goods and certain goods helping to bring about liberal cultures. That stuff's interesting. And you'll have people more literate in the kind of philosophical argument, which helps us too. I think it's like it's a kind of overdetermination thing. You want people to be making all of the different kinds of arguments so more people across the world understand the wonders, understand how it is you can be living a better, freer life.
And hopefully how to kind of avoid living the really crappiest
That's
lives
right.
possible.
So things like you shouldn't be treating people in this way. Or if you organize your political system in this way, you get better outcomes. And also people can be happier, people can have greater well-being if they access these kinds of cultural goods. So a whole broad range, not just of involving different disciplines and different topic areas, but different kind of methodological approaches as well.
So that, I mean, unless you have something.
I was just going to say that one of the shared beliefs we have that informs the project is the idea of pluralism. Mm-hmm. And I think seeing more...
And pluralism not defined as we disagree, but let's meet in the middle.
No, that's the opposite of pluralism. No,
exactly.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, me too.
No, Isaiah Berlin says there are many different things that are good, and we are doomed to choose. And it is in those choices that liberalism is relevant and concerned. This is why we love the economists. Economists are great at helping people make choices and understanding what a choice is and what the consequences will be. But there are other ways of thinking about those choices, and that's basically what we want to bring into the discussion.
And that there are many different ways to live a good life doesn't mean that all of the ways of living your life are good. And similarly, because there are many different values doesn't mean that everything is a value. Yes. So you're right. It's not just let's meet in the middle or what is the consensus
don't meet
determination.
In the middle, my God.
It's there are many, many good ways, but some are bad.
And of course, the main argument against liberalism is you guys are morally neutral, you don't have values, you just end up in this kind of meaningless void. It's all drifting. It's all childless cat ladies. It's all, all this stuff. Actually, what we're trying to say is, no, we have incredibly strong moral values. Yeah. Yeah. None of the classical liberals would recognize that at all.
Aside from anything else, if liberalism is anything, it is a kind of philosophical approach, which values freedom. Freedom itself is a value.
So
personally, I think it's incoherent to think it's only freedom that counts to liberalism.
Sure.
Like equality is kind of baked in there too, but already we're starting to see some kind of boundaries, right?
Yeah. But so this is a good segue to actually having that conversation about kind of whether we economists kind of have done a poor job. I mean, in a way, I know we've done a good job, but maybe it is the policy industry that has done a poor job. So here is how I think about it, right? So there was an enormous investment into the classical liberal think tanks, especially coming from France and the US. It was just kind of amazing that there are actually people like me that can make a living fighting for this system, right? As an economist, but there's just like many of us. There are lawyers, there are like lobbyists, there are like just kind of, there's this whole thing, right? Like many big think tanks and effectively, they were built around policy, right? They're trained economists, lawyers, policy analysts, and somewhere along the way, I guess I would put it after the fall of communism, right? When the existential ideological battle was won by the good guy and arguably by that kind of the kind of free market side, those institutions stopped holding the line on principle and started chasing relevance, right? It's like that total, like, constant kind of battle I've had within my soul in my whole career, being between like this uber principle person and being a little bit relevant or not relevant at all. I think there is actually kind of a very relevant part of being super principle, because people can point to you and say, at least I'm not crazy like her, and it kind of help them move the ball. But, that's me, right? So people want a seat at the table. They want to be in the room where the legislation was written, and to be in that room, you have to make concession, and we lose the plot precisely because we've won. And it's kind of in that sense that I think, like, after the fall of the wall, I think kind of we stopped fighting on principles, and we've kind of like directed a ton of resources and intellectual effort and try to actually think about implementation of more free market solution. And because we have to go through the political system. So kind of it's in that sense that there's been this investment, and it's not that some think tanks like haven't had some project on the cultural side, but it really hasn't been prevalent. And I think because we felt we won, maybe it wasn't kind of as. And now we're in a situation, right, where in so many ways we've won so many battles, and the economists have shown that how the free market's superior to the alternatives and all this. here we are with a lot of people feeling that they're worse off than we were in the 1950s, and also basically using kind of like basically going after the economists for things that really are actually on the cultural side. And we just have nothing really to say about this. So, like, am I wrong?
I don't think you're wrong. I do think you're hard on the economists. Is it your job to do this stuff?
No, it is not. But what I mean, so it's not necessarily on the economists, but maybe kind of like the way we've structured this whole thing about, and maybe this is because we're in DC and, you know,
Sure.
Fortune 1 is here, the federal government. And that's kind of where we spend our time looking at this thing and feeling we have to be in conversation with them instead of actually the American people.
I think there is a point maybe that liberals are less connected to their own tradition, almost by definition, than than socialists, conservatives, left liberals.
Is it because we won, or is it because...
No, I think it's inherent in the idea of liberalism. And it makes it...
Yeah, I see. I could see that.
Right? It's culturally, when you're around other classical liberals, and it makes it harder to propagate your tradition. Because if you're not inheriting it in the same way, you're not going to hand it on in the same way. I often think this about when people make arguments about the fertility rate, and they make very individualistic arguments, and you sort of want to say, well, I agree with all that, and I don't think anyone should do something they don't want to do and whatever. But if people who believe in freedom, liberal individualism, whatever, have fewer children than, the Mormons, the Amish, the whoever's, then in the future, it will be much harder to maintain the values that you believe are so supremely important right now because you don't have anyone to hand them on to. And I think in a way we've had that problem, not literally with children, but as a movement, there's been this kind of problem of
on the
what are we passing
front,
on?
It's kind of interesting, like the division, and I wonder how it's going to play out in the future, where actually those who are still having children are precisely the Mormons and the Christian and the conservatives,
the less liberal.
And meanwhile,
groups.
On the left, they're not having. A lot of people are not having children, and I wonder what that produces.
It varies a lot, I think, but there is to me something about liberalism that is less interested in passing itself on than the more conservative traditions.
That's the problem.
I think it's been true for a long time, and it's quite fixable. But
I also think that one of the reasons I think liberalism is valuable is because I do think it picks out certain truths. So I think, for instance, I think it's good for humans to make choices for themselves about a whole load of things. I think otherwise you can lead quite a infantilized life in which you don't have the chance to achieve things, you don't have the chance to know things. Exercising this capacity that we all have, it's quite easy to make an argument that that's valuable. And because that seems, at least to me, to pick out a truth, I think I'm less anxious about this idea of requiring it to be passed down. I think it's much easier if you do have people to pass it down, and particularly in just that instinctive sense. You said something nice earlier on, Henry, about people, even if they don't shout about it, they are quite liberal.
Yeah.
We like shouting about it. It's our job to shout about it. But it's also just what we want to do.
Also, we're loud.
But if you,
by nature.
but if you grow up in, that's right, totally true. If you grow up in a society where it's liberal, even if you claim you're not a liberal, you probably are doing liberal stuff all the time.
Yes.
So it's easier in that sense.
Yeah.
But I tend to think
it's like people who are complaining on Twitter that technology is killing us. Right?
Yeah, this is beautiful. This is exactly the point, right? So they don't always realize that it's the thing they value, but they clearly value it. So I think I'm less concerned because I think even if everybody lost the works of liberalism and people grew up without knowing about it, I think we'd discover it again as humans because I think it tracks some truths about what it is to be human. It might be harder. There'd be difficult times along the way, but I'm not so per se concerned about that, I think.
I don't know that I entirely agree with that. I mean, at some level, obviously I agree, right? But the problem is like when people are not able to actually put a name and recognize that this good things that's happening is actually the product of the liberal order that we live in or the markets, right? They may actually demand policies, and they are demanding policies that are actually killing.
I don't disagree with any of that.
The thing that is good in their lives. And you see this. This is always the problem with, I think business people, right? On one hand, especially the rich one, they're the beneficiary of the splendor of the market, right? And yet they're literally constantly kind of going to, like, if you ask them, they want all sorts of things like that are not consistent with the system that allowed them to be what they are. And we have, like, right now, like, the Trump administration and all these tech guys and our remarkable entrepreneur, they're putting in place a system that is kind of literally the opposite. They think that they can build a system like you build an enterprise, and they're just planting the seeds of things that are very counterproductive. And I think it's because they don't have an understanding at a kind of intellectual level.
I agree with that. I think all I'm saying is I kind of am keen to separate out my concerns about the death of liberalism or the way in which liberalism is likely to perpetuate from my deep concerns about what it means for people to live in illiberal times.
Yes.
So I can say something like, I really, really hate the authoritarianism and I think it's doing bad things for people and I want to shout about that. But I think I can be less committed to having some grand theory about what's likely for liberalism. What are the conditions in which liberalism is more likely? Those seem to me like, apart from anything else, empirical type questions that as a philosopher, I just may not be so good. I don't know about things like, for instance, where do we want to put into this assessment the idea that it seems that kids quite often like to rebel against their parents.
Yeah.
I could see somebody making a contrarian argument which says, actually, if everyone in the next generation followed the Amish culture or Mormonism or one of these other more narrow, less liberal ways of life, maybe the net result down the line would be more liberalism. I'm not going to like that mechanism because I don't like the kind of consequentialist justification, but also just that kind of argument is not the kind of argument I think I'm particularly good at a philosopher as assessing. I'm better at making the arguments around things like, hey, here are some reasons why this thing is bad and wrong.
By the way, kids understand very well something that is essential to our project, which is property rights. Try to take something from a kid.
Yes.
This is mine. This is mine.
Yes. Good.
I agree with that. I do think liberalism is more self-correcting than some of the other traditions because like everyone's a liberal when the government's knocking on your door at 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Everyone suddenly discovers their love of the Bill of Rights at that point.
Well, I mean, like Democrats are now they're rediscovering free trade and
which
free
is
speech.
But that's good, right?
No,
because
it
is inherent in the liberal
system. And they
system.
have been benefiting from it. This is your point from the beginning again.
Yeah.
That just because they don't claim to be the thing doesn't mean that they aren't acting as the thing.
Exactly.
And I should say, all of this, me and Henry being like posing these objections to your nice questions, is us just being liberals, right? We agree with you.
Yes.
And the reason we have this project is because we do think we need to be making these arguments more strongly. It's just interesting for us, I think, intellectually to test it out and also to apply some kind of categorization around, this kind of argument, that kind of argument, this kind of problem, that kind of problem.
What I want to add though is it's self-correcting and everyone's a liberal in a tight corner and whatever. But people are capable of being dominated. And there are aspects of human behavior and personality that mean that we can control each other, we can be abused by other people, right? And some people will take they'll approve of it or they'll take a kind of pleasure in it. We're not at all, as a species, immune from enjoying cruelty, right? And so you see this with certain things that are happening in American politics right now, the divisiveness of what's good and what's not good. And liberalism may not be self-correcting against that. So I think what feels like the actual risk to liberalism is more like the dominance of nasty feelings, right? Or an emotional. This is why people talk about vibe changes. And all the philosophers are saying, yes, but what is a vibe? Where are the vibes? I don't know how to...
You know it when you see it.
Exactly. And the problem is that it's happened. It's out there. Everyone's sort of going along with it. And that's a kind of communitarian thing that to liberals like us is a bit weird. And we're saying, well, I don't know, there are no vibes. Vibes aren't real. And they're all then voting based on these vibes, right? That's really our challenge.
So I'm sure the people listening can easily kind of see where economics and philosophy fall in this battle. Where does literature fall in this? And Jane Austen in particular. I love Jane Austen, so I had to ask Jane Austen. And my daughters, we are big Jane Austen.
So the rest of the episode is all about Jane Austen, yes?
Can I do my Emma theory?
No,
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
We don't have to have an entirely other episode. And so where does literature and Jane Austen in particular fall into this is helpful in this Pursuit of Liberalism project?
I actually don't know that literature is helpful, in the sense that I don't think literature is trying to argue for or against liberalism, or that it is...
It could model it, couldn't it?
Certain works of literature definitely model certain aspects of literature. Jane Austen's clearly a member of the Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. She may also be an Anglican and a relatively conservative young woman. Potentially she ages out of that conservatism a little bit, but not very much. But she is clearly a member of the Enlightenment, and so a liberal to that extent. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that we should use her books as a way of, quote unquote, teaching liberalism mm-hmm. in the way that we use mm-hmm. John Stuart Mill's books, right? They're not ideological or polemical. They are primarily aesthetic. Now,
are they though?
Yeah.
Because it kind of seems that a lot of the books center around the difficulty that these young women find themselves in when they happen because of the law.
Oh,
to
so
not be
of course.
married and this is indeed now something that we've changed. There all these books are around the unfairness of a system where, I mean, they always end up well, which is, I think, why they're beloved. But and in a way, like, how much have they contributed to changing that thing that she demonstrates novel after novel as actually could be just really punishing.
I think that's true. And I think a lot of other, Henry James, for example, is one of the great liberal writers. He's completely unpolitical. Mm-hmm. But he is a liberal in the sense that he values you as a unique individual. Mm-hmm. And he is so good at writing about the way that one person can completely dominate or crush another person, typically a husband or a father dominating a daughter mm-hmm. or a wife. And he's very concerned in a liberal manner about that domination and about the containment of a person or the diminishing of a person, right? And I do take your point about Jane Austen. I just think that these are primarily works of art, and to be appreciated and experienced as such. So I don't actually use them as a sort of poking stick in liberal arguments. But I do think, in a historical way, I find it very interesting to think about how Jane Austen read and responded to Adam Smith, right? Or the way in which Henry James is a liberal, while almost sort of shrugging off anything that might look or sound like philosophy or politics. Yeah. Please keep it away. How awful, my dear. This is a novel. But so deeply liberal, so concerned with those questions. And the value of literature is for us as individuals, not for us as a particular group of ideological thinkers, even though we can say with some confidence that Jane Austen believes, or at least deals with, many of the things that Adam Smith deals with.
So who are the essential canon? Like, if you were building a reading list to give to interns, for instance.
Of works of liberalism or works of literature?
Work of literatures that written by people who you think model liberalism, I guess.
So
I'm not talking about the economist and the philosopher. Yeah. But like maybe think poet, novelist, essayist, like who
so long as we take it in this apolitical sense.
Yeah.
It's
absolutely.
a sort of history of ideas thing rather than a, learn your liberalism. A spoonful of Adam Smith in the morning, right?
Yeah.
I think Shakespeare's essential. And I think just the idea of individual personality and how expansive and multifaceted and surprising it can be, the extent to which a person can never really know themselves or can never really know what they might be capable of. In his essay on poetry, Mill says, what is poetry? Well, it's a form of, speech. I'm trying to speak something to you, but that makes it a bit like oratory, and it can't be oratory because it's not like a politician giving a speech. So he says, oratory is when you hear someone speaking, and poetry is when you overhear someone speaking. Now, Shakespeare's characters are always overhearing themselves speak. They're always saying things and then thinking, well, that changes it. And do I want that? And now I'm confused, and maybe I'll try this, and I don't know. That is so individualistic and human, right? I mean, that is so difficult to achieve in art. And he's just incredible at that.
By the way, I will recommend right here the conversation with Tyler, between Tyler Cowan and Henry on Measure for Measure.
Which actually is a great play for thinking about liberal issues and a very relevant play for, right now.
Yeah.
I think also the Romantic poets, they pick up Shakespeare, and they're obsessed with the idea of individual. Yeah, I mean, in
even
English,
French?
people like,
Even the
Vero,
French?
please.
Isn't Lamartine
You have your French, I have my English.
Okay.
This is good. I mean, Keats for me is the great,
Yeah.
but also Wordsworth. These are great voices of individual identity. Jane Austen, because if you're interested in questions like how to be good in a commercial society, how to be worthy of love when you have to try and understand other people in that way. She's the best at that. Henry James, as I said, a lot of people like Portrait of a Lady. I find that quite boring. Wings of the Dove would be my choice. Buddenbrooks by Thomas Mann is a wonderful novel about what it means to try and adapt to a changing economy and to fail. I think that's a very good one. And then, I mean, if you read Isaiah Berlin, he's completely steeped in the European tradition, right? He's obsessed with the novelists and the poets. So, as is Mill, Smith recommends Smith actually recommends a lot of French writers.
Yeah.
So Molière, people like that. So I would follow, after that point, I would say to people, don't take my list, be a good liberal and make your own list.
Yes.
Maybe it's Voltaire. I mean, who knows, right? But those are my essentials. I think Dante maybe
list?
as well.
Well, one more prosaic thing I think I'd say first, while I think about my list, is I think it's worthwhile making a distinction between these producers of artistic goods who, in some content-focused sense, represent liberalism. And then the ones, so for instance, if you take novelists or poets who are more experimental, so you have a more structure kind of sense of representing liberalism. So you could say, the experimental composers, for instance, in the 20th century represent something about liberalism, both in the sense that maybe it's in the more free society that you get that kind of experimentation. Again, that's an empirical question, but also experimenting. You said this beautiful thing about Henry James values you as a unique individual. I have these philosophical problems with the word unique, but I know what you're getting at. And I think there's a sense in which producing experimental art might well also speak to something like that. That's slightly different from saying, hey, Jane Austen in this content sense helps us to understand some things. But who would I include? Well, to that end, I would probably look to some of the 20th century experimental writers, whether that's the poets, some of the great French 20th century, like symbolist poets who are kind of pushing the boundaries, whether in terms of their content, you get someone like Baudelaire shocking people, or you get, I don't know, Verlaine or somebody just kind of pushing the boundaries in other kinds of ways. And then in music, the minimalists or the real kind of 12-tone composers who again are saying, look, you had this really structured way of doing things, and Beethoven came along and kind of ended that with the Ninth Symphony.
And by the way, the markets and the liberal order allowed them to not just innovate and not be thrown in jail. That's
so that's right.
And succeed if what they did was had a consumer base. Right?
These social constraints that oftentimes producers of great art faced. You look at the religious composers in the Renaissance period, and you get heavy constraints on what the church was allowing to be performed in the or indeed you get the taste of the particular patron, whereby there were these constraints. There were all kinds of interesting questions that we've been thinking about over the past few weeks about arts funding. Henry can talk to that in terms of various things that we like to argue about. But I think there's something to be said for experimentation, which I would look to at least in this question around particularly something like, what are the kinds of cultural goods that the liberal society produces, which is, of course, a different question from where can you look to for some kind of liberal formation or understanding about liberalism from some particular novels, which, of course, may have come from a non-liberal. I think you can learn, if you read Solzhenitsyn, for instance, you may well just rebel against what's happening to this poor dude. But that was, by definition, a book created from a very repressive moment. So, I don't know. As a philosopher, I'm just going to have all of these questions.
Well, I know I like this answer very much because this is sort of explaining why I'm uncomfortable with the idea of a liberal canon.
Yeah.
Mill's very strong on this. The whole point of liberalism is that we learn from all the traditions, right? So the Bible is fundamental to the liberal canon in that way. Gulliver's Travels, right?
Yeah.
These books that are not liberal in any modern political sense, but which are very important for us.
Being around you guys, I have realized I've been a very committed not liker of poetry.
You're the French romantic, Vero. I mean, come on.
I don't think anyone would call me that, but
I have seen you with your cats.
well, that's a whole. That's just
The cat is the poem.
Never has there been any living creature loved as much as Vero's two cats.
This cats, they do something to me, but I have to say, like, I think I'll blame the French education system, but actually, you guys talk about poetry so much, and
I read poetry every day.
In your founding post, right? You write about Mill recited Shelley's Ode to Liberty and wept. And so, what does it tell us? That the most probably rigorous utilitarian thinker of the 19th century needed poetry to feel the full weight of what he believed in intellectually. And what is wrong with me?
Are we going to have an argument about utilitarianism now?
No.
I held off like 7 times in this conversation.
That's not that. I mean, it's just like, I mean, I'm really curious about this, like at a very personal level, where I'll hear poetry like you do. You have this project where you memorize poetry and you recite it on and I'm kind of love seeing you do this. It does nothing to me.
Why do you? But you say you love seeing it. So what is that? It's just because your friend is doing something.
Yeah.
Is it because you think he's succeeding, or is it you think he's succeeding in a particular thing?
Do I just look great on camera?
Let's say he was reciting the vacuum cleaner handbook instead. Would you have some different emotional response?
No. I think I would enjoy that quite.
Actually, you know what? I would. Can you please do this next?
And so,
do you want me to do the phone book?
Yeah,
the phone book. Yeah. No, I mean, I will tell you what it is that it does to me when I watch you, even though I don't understand what you're talking about. And it doesn't move me. It's just like, actually, I love that you're doing something that you love and you're sharing it, and you're obviously challenging yourself by actually committing these to memory. And I just love that. And that's a form of art, by the way. And I respect, I just love it. And I'm kind of thinking maybe if I watch it enough, I'll, especially when you do it with your stuffed nose because of the pollen and
that
Virginia.
Was bad.
I'm kind of like, it's going to start moving me. And but I just love that you're doing this because it is the expression of you sharing something that you're passionate about. And so why I feel this, I'm not exactly sure. But I mean, I can tell you, I remember being in school and we would have to read something, a poem, and say and what is he saying? And I would be thinking, I don't know.
So I'd say,
sorry.
No, you go.
Did they make you memorize it?
Yes, of course.
And that didn't help.
No, and my grandmother loved poetry.
Yeah.
So it's like we went to see Victor Hugo's house and I mean it was just like because Hugo did a lot of poetry in addition to the stuff we know him for, but I don't know, it was just I think it was just like a kind of somewhat of a burden.
So one thing, I think you may be overweighting understanding in terms of being able to enjoy something. Although I actually do have this sense in which I think you only enjoy something if you enjoy it. It's a subject. If you understand it. I think it's very hard for me to say, no, Vero, you are enjoying it if you don't feel like you're enjoying it. I think a condition of you enjoying it is you feeling like you're enjoying it.
Listening to him.
Yes, but what I think
recite these.
Yes, I agree. But I wonder though, you keep saying these things about understanding it or knowing what's going on. And I wonder if there's maybe some sense in which you can free yourself from that expectation, which may have come from your overly harsh French education, whereby you can just think, maybe I don't need to engage with it in that sense.
There's something focusing when you have a stern French teacher with a stick in their hand.
PTSD.
Going around going what is he saying? And clapping, and you're thinking, this may end up on my hands.
Yeah. I mean, some people don't love poetry, and that's fine. You don't have to. It's not a problem. I think poetry's,
I'm reconsidering. I've never thought it was a problem, but I'm kind of reconsidering. I don't want to be missing out on something.
If you can find your way in, it will be wonderful. But if you're just not a poetry person, I don't think that's a failing or a I think that's fine, right? I wouldn't. Don't become your own French teacher with your own stick, telling yourself off.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it does come back to this point around there are many ways to live a good life. And you love reading novels. We talked a lot about music, for instance. You do have these other artistic interests. That said, there are some things where you want to say something like, we have these great things in the world, and if our friend is missing out on one of these great things, and Henry would be much more of an objectivist about this in terms of particular works of poetry, we might want to say, even though you have the other things, you may be missing out. And that might be a reason for you to just consider whether maybe you haven't found the way in for you. Although at the same time, I don't think you need to scold yourself over it.
We're all missing something.
We all are missing something. There is an interesting question, though, about what the set of things are that we shouldn't miss, or which it would be sad for us to miss. I don't think it's going to get onto the question of it being wrong for you to miss, although it might be wrong for somebody not to enable you to have the opportunity to access it. So you might say, I've just been writing a thing about this, or I'm getting distracted. If the kid grows up and gets to the age of 18 without knowing that Shakespeare was a playwright or wrote these plays, that maybe the kid has been wronged. But are you wronging yourself by not making yourself give more time to try to enjoy this thing that you've never enjoyed? My take is probably just going to be relatively loose and say, as my friend, I feel sorry because I think you are missing out on something great, but I also know that you do have and enjoy these other artistic forms. So don't beat yourself up, but keep trying.
But I do make the videos in the hope that it sets an example, that you can just watch it and enjoy it and not worry about, do I love poetry? Do I understand this? Just put all that away.
I enjoy watching you.
Exactly. And so that's it. That's great. Yeah. And if that then leads to you discover one of these poems, actually you think, I did quite like some of that. That will be great. But we don't have to do it in this schoolroom kind of way. Poetry isn't like that. Poetry is, I think it's a very sort of instinctive, physical thing. It's full of strong feeling. It has its own force.
Well, but this is, I think, the reason why I thought this is not, it's never, and maybe I'm too bound to the fact that I should be understanding it too. Yep. But it is kind of like poetry is attached to feelings. And when I listen to it and I'm not feeling what I feel like people should, I should be feeling, I'm kind of like, I guess it's not for me. But, so, okay, I have 25 million questions for you, but I'm going to, because of time, I'm going to, zip to the last one. I want you both to take a real swing at this, kind of make me feel it, like poetry feeling, not understanding it intellectually, but I want to kind of like see if I can, mill whip, like listening to poetry, right? So if you were asked the question, why does the liberal order deserve to survive? Not the economic argument, not the historical argument, but in terms of what it means to be human and live the good life. I mean, does this thing deserves to win? Take your best shot at it.
I'll come back to this beautiful thing Henry said earlier about Henry James valuing you as a unique individual. For me, the great thing about liberalism is this fundamental idea that we all count equally. And I think we all count equally in large part because we have this capacity to be a free agent. So what I mean by this is the capacity to be able to deliberate on things, come to decisions, and act on those decisions. And I think the beautiful thing about liberalism is it tells us that we have to treat every human being in that way, even if they don't have currently the capacity to exercise that. So the person in the coma, the little baby, you have to treat them as if they're that kind of thing, even if they're not currently able to do it, either because they're not old enough, and therefore you need to also be more paternalistic, in a narrow sense of paternalistic, to the kid. I don't know any other kind of guiding, don't like using the word philosophy in this sense, I'm going to use it, way of governing your life and governing your institutions that demands that every human being must be treated in this way. I think that's incredibly special.
That's it. That's
Did you weep? Are you
I mean, I'm very moved.
I can see some tears.
I'm very, very moved.
It may be the allergies, but...
No, I'm moved. What about you, Henry?
The beginning of all political philosophy is death. And we have to make these decisions because we're going to run out of time and because it won't end happily, right? And that's the greatest constraint we face. And it therefore matters very much what type of decisions we make and how they bind us in the future. It matters very much what kind of opportunities we have. You only need to turn on the television and watch the news and see the way that people's lives are taken away from them in other countries, not just by the government, by the culture, by the norms, by the standards that they're expected to meet, And then you go outside and you talk to your neighbors and you hear them complain about political partisanship and the way everyone's out for themselves and all these other problems we have in modern culture. And it just warms my heart. And I think, yes, we have strangers cooperating with each other. We have someone from out of town arriving on the train and they can go and eat food in 100 restaurants. They can make a new friend.
Mm-hmm.
They can read a book that was written in another language. This is the only time in history we've had this. This is the only time we've come close to like feeling like we might actually have done so much and been so accomplished in our lives, emotionally, physically, intellectually, spiritually, that we've tried to get away from that constraint of death without just watching the clock out, tilling the ground, being locked in the house, being under someone else's thumb. I mean, it's actually very hard to put it into words how wonderful this is.
Yeah, it is wonderful, actually. And risking to actually not make this the last note, actually, as you were talking, I was thinking, this is kind of never really quite thought about this. But in a world that everyone talks about is so polarized, right, by political party, actually kind of the marketplace is the place where actually trust.
That's right.
Trust is still as strong as ever, where you deal with total strangers, where you collaborate, where prices emerge like as kind of the expression of all of that. And it's like really quite amazing.
Can I just say I like everything Henry said, except I want to make one objection, which is I firmly believe that thanks to the market and all of these freedoms that I'm going to get to live forever. I think this constraint of death.
The current situation is that death is a constraint.
I'm just saying.
You just had coffee.
I knew this was coming.
You just had coffee with Robin Hanson, didn't you?
I argued against him very strongly that AIs are not conscious, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that AIs are going to bring about
Robin,
the end of
a professor at GMU,
the end of human death,
who believe that one way or another, we're going to continue living because we're going to have our brains.
That's right. So he thinks that having your brain uploaded to the cloud counts as living. I don't. I think that counts as death.
Thank God.
I think that the AIs, however,
I don't want either of that.
Yeah, I want to live forever, and I think AI technology is going to help us solve bodily human death, and I'm very excited about that. Even though, Henry, it may do something for your argument. Sorry.
I suspect that you would reach a point of complete and utter despair. It may
take
you a few hundred years.
Did you not read my fantastic piece on my Substack?
I read it, but I didn't necessarily agree with it.
I made a very strong argument against that position.
Well, the ultimate argument is being 600 years old and thinking, what the hell am I going to do now? My back hurts and I've got eternity in front of me.
This is why you've got to make yourself as interesting as possible.
But I do think that scarcity plays a very important role in our sense of
meaning.
And actually, it's kind of interesting. This is taking us a little bit off base, but not so much. Like Senator Ben Sasse, right, is dying of pancreatic cancer, and he's a devout Christian, and he's always thought he was on the clock and not be so much afraid of death. But now he says it's actually it takes obviously a new meaning, and he kind of realizes in a way how important the fact that we're gonna die. I mean, and death sucks. I mean, it's just but I don't know how we evolve if no one's dying.
I think fear of death can be a good instrument to understanding the value of living, but I would hope that it's not a necessary tool. I would hope that if it were the case that we could live forever, we would still be able to understand the value of achievement or happiness or love.
But I can tell you, if we're going to be living together forever, we better reform Social Security.
We'd better get you into poetry too.
I want.
You've got forever. Henry and I are going to give you a poem a day forever.
My God. No, I mean, I would love this to be true, right? I don't want to die. I don't want to have to leave all the people that I love. I just think it's awful, and it's you can hardly think about it. I'm a reluctant holder of this belief that if we lived forever, it would not necessarily be in our favor. I don't think we are just biologically, psychologically, whatever. I think we have some very, very, binding constraints.
I agree, but this is one reason why I think we should all think about this much more seriously, because I actually think it is a current possibility. I think we all kind of assume this, that when we die, perhaps our mind lives on and we're alone in the darkness forever, I think it's something we should all take very seriously because of this reason you give, that it would be psychologically very hard. My assumption is that any person in that scenario would many times wish that they didn't persist.
Yep.
But the fact that potentially we could, I think means that it's something we should think hard about. And one argument I've made is I think you can insulate yourself against that by working as hard as you can now to make yourself as interesting as possible, to come up with good ways to think about the interesting things you know, do some philosophy, learn some poetry.
I actually think after death is going to be awesome. But, you know,
You think
I
it's gonna
still
be...
don't want to, it's going to be awesome, but I don't want to die nonetheless. But unfortunately, we're going to have to stop here, but we could continue. Thanks,
Scarcity.
you guys. This is, yeah, exactly. And it was so fun. So
This was great.
The Pursuit of Liberalism podcast, your podcast, your Substack.
My Substack is called The Ends Don't Justify the Means, and I have a podcast, philosophy podcast called Working Definition.
Yeah. The Common Reader.
The Common Reader.
Yeah.
And the podcast is the same because I'm bad at naming things.
Yeah.
Whereas our Pursuit of Liberalism podcast, which Henry named brilliantly after his favorite person, John Stuart Mill, is called The Street Porter and the Philosopher.
No, that's Adam Smith.
Oh, God, it is. Sorry.
Say it
You're
again.
right.
Say it again.
Which Henry named brilliantly after his favorite philosopher, Adam Smith. The Street Porter and the Philosopher.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Vero.
Thank you, guys.